I want you to think about something. When you want to defeat an enemy, a real enemy, a people you need to control permanently, what is the most effective weapon you can use? It's not a gun. Guns require constant maintenance. They require soldiers. They require ongoing resources, and they create martyrs, people whose deaths inspire resistance rather than extinguishing it. It's not a law. When you want to defeat an enemy, law is not the most effective weapon. Laws can be repealed. They can be resisted. They can be overturned when enough people recognize their injustice and stand against them together. It's not even poverty. As Jamaica's own history proved, a people pushed to the absolute edge of survival will find extraordinary reserves of resistance. The Maroons had nothing and defeated the British Empire. The most effective weapon, the one that works permanently, that requires no soldiers, no ongoing maintenance, no external enforcement, is the one that makes the target do the work for you. The weapon that gets inside the mind of a people and make them police themselves. It makes them limit themselves, harm themselves and each other. It makes them reject their own worth and forget their own history. It makes them mistake their oppression for their nature. That weapon has a name. And in this series, we are going to take it apart completely, layer by layer, until there's nothing left of it that can operate in you without your knowledge. Let me tell you how you know the weapon is working. Let me describe the symptoms, because they are visible everywhere in Jamaican culture right now, and most people are reacting to them without understanding what they're actually looking at. A certain set of mainly young Jamaicans bleaching their skin, not one or two, a pattern, a trend. Young people looking at the skin they were born in and deciding at increasing rates that it needs to be changed. We examined this in series 1, but now I want you to look at it differently. Not as a cultural wound inherited from slavery, although it is that, but as a symptom, a live symptom of a weapon that is still operating right now in real time. The scamming, the lottery scam, the romance scam, the various forms of fraud that have become, for a specific segment of Jamaican youth, not just an income stream, but an identity, a culture, complete with its own music, its own aesthetics, its own code of values. Young people who are clearly intelligent, clearly resourceful, clearly capable of sophisticated planning and execution, directing all of that intelligence toward extracting money from strangers without a flicker of remorse. And the violence, not the violence of desperation, like a hungry person stealing food. The violence that appears disconnected from survival need. Violence that seems almost casual, that it is celebrated in certain spaces, that it has become normalized to the point where communities absorb it as weather. Something that happens, something you survive, something you do not expect to stop. Now I want to ask you something. When you look at these three things, the bleaching, the scamming, the normalized violence, what is the common thread? The common thread is the absence of something, the absence of a moral framework. That framework that places the community above the individual, the absence of an identity strong enough to reject a foreign standard of beauty. The absence of ancestral accountability, the sense that your actions are answerable to something larger than your immediate desires and needs. These behaviors are not the weapon. They are the evidence that the weapon has been working. They are what a people look like when the thing that was supposed to hold them, like their identity, their ancestral grounding, their collective moral framework, has been sufficiently damaged. So what is the weapon? And how does it work? The weapon is the deliberate, systematic destruction of a people's psychological foundation. Not their buildings, not the economy, though those were destroyed too, but their psychological foundation, the internal architecture that tells a person who they are, what they are worth, what they owe to others, what others owe to them, and what the consequences of their actions are beyond the immediate moment. Every human being, every culture has a psychological foundation. It is built from several things. For one, identity, the story of who you are and where you came from. There's values, the framework that tells you what matters and what does not. Accountability, the sense of being answerable to something beyond yourself. There's community, the belonging that makes individual sacrifice for collective good feel meaningful rather than pointless. And ancestral continuity, the understanding that you are a link in a chain that stretches backward through time and forward into the future, and that your actions affect both directions. The colonial system and its modern continuation targeted every single one of these foundations systematically and deliberately. Identity was attacked through colorism, through the replacement of African names and languages, through the teaching of a history that began with slavery and omitted everything that came before it. A people who do not know where they come from have no stable ground to stand on. They are available to be told who they are by whoever speaks loudest. Values were attacked through the replacement of African communal ethics, which placed the well-being of the community at the center of every individual decision, with a colonial value system that celebrated individual acquisition, competition, and the accumulation of visible wealth regardless of how it was obtained. The scammer is not operating outside of values. He's operating inside a value system, the wrong one, the imported one. Accountability was attacked through the destruction of ancestral spiritual traditions. In African traditional systems, the systems that survived in Jamaica as Kumina, Revival, Rastafari, your actions were accountable to the ancestors, to the community, and to a divine order that saw everything. Remove that accountability structure and replace it with a church that offers forgiveness for any sin, followed by a political system that models corruption at the highest level. And you have created a moral environment where harm without consequence becomes conceivable. Community was attacked through garrison politics, the deliberate division of communities along political lines so that the natural solidarity that would otherwise exist between poor Jamaicans was redirected into internal conflict. A community that is fighting itself cannot hold its members accountable. It cannot create the social pressure that makes harmful behavior uncomfortable. It cannot be the container that individual conscience needs to function. An ancestral continuity, the sense of being part of something that stretches beyond your individual life, that was attacked through every mechanism we have already examined. The church that made the ancestors demonic, the political system that made collective memory irrelevant, the education system that taught children to be ashamed of where they came from. Remove identity, remove values, remove accountability, remove community, remove ancestral continuity. What is left? A person, alone, stripped, in the present moment with no past to guide them and no future to answer to. With a survival brain that is running the operating system of a world that no longer exists, making decisions from scarcity, fear, and the desperate need to feel like something, anything, in a world that has given them no stable sense of what they are. That is not criminal. That is a person whose psychological foundation was removed before they were old enough to understand what was happening to them. And that removal did not happen by accident. Now I want to show you how the installation happened, because the understanding of the mechanism is what allows you to see it operating possibly in your own life and in the lives of the other people around you. The installation began on the slave ship, not metaphorically, literally. The specific conditions of the Middle Passage, the complete removal of language, of name, family, community, spiritual tradition, and cultural reference point were psychologically catastrophic in a way that has no parallel in modern experience. Imagine waking up one day with no memory of who you are, no language to describe your experience, no community to reflect your identity back to you, no ancestor to call on, nothing familiar in any direction. That is the psychological condition that the enslaved African arrived in Jamaica carrying. And the plantation system, designed by people who understood exactly what they were doing, built on that condition rather than allowing it to heal. The plantation created what psychologists now call a traumatic bonding environment. The enslaved person's survival depended entirely on the approval of the enslaver. Their access to food, shelter, safety, and the ability to keep their family together was controlled by someone who had absolute power over them. In that environment, the psychological survival strategy, the one the human nervous system defaults to, is to adopt the values, the standards, and the worldview of the person who holds your survival in their hands. That's not weakness. That is the human nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The tragedy is that it was designed for temporary, extreme situations, not for a condition that lasted 400 years and was then passed down through generations as normal. The installation was completed through the post-slavery period. Emancipation in 1838 freed the body. It did not provide the psychological reconstruction that would have been required to undo what the plantation had done to the mind. There was no truth and reconciliation process, no therapeutic intervention. There was no educational program that restored ancestral identity and cultural pride. The formerly enslaved were given freedom and a world that was still designed to keep them at the bottom of it, and told to make something of themselves within that world, which they did extraordinarily with resilience that should never be understated. But the psychological wound, the damage to identity, to values, to accountability, to community and ancestral continuity was passed down. That wound was passed down, generation to generation, not through weakness, through the ordinary mechanism of human inheritance. Children learn from parents. Parents teach what they know, and what they knew, what was available to them, was shaped by what had been done to their minds. This is what is operating in Jamaica today, not a moral failing of the current generation, a psychological inheritance that has never been fully examined, has never been fully named and healed. The weapon was installed centuries ago, and it has been running, updating itself with each generation's new context ever since. The weapon did not stay the same. It updated itself. For each generation, it found new delivery mechanisms that were appropriate to the cultural movement. In the era of garrison politics, the weapon updated through the deliberate creation of community division, giving people a political identity to replace the ancestral identity that had been removed. JLP, PNP, orange, green, not a real ideological difference. A tribal substitute for the community belonging that was destroyed. The weapon used the human need for belonging, which is real and legitimate, and redirected it into a system that served the political establishment rather than the people. In the current era, the weapon has updated through social media and the global entertainment system. Young Jamaicans are now receiving their identity, their values, their standard of beauty, their model of success and desirability, not from their family, not from their community, not from their ancestral tradition, from an algorithm, from an entertainment industry that celebrates specific aesthetics, that celebrates specific behaviors, specific divisions, specific definitions of power and worth that are almost perfectly designed to continue the psychological damage that the plantation began. The bleaching is not just an old colonial wound expressing itself. It's a colonial wound being actively reinforced by a global beauty industry worth billions of dollars that profits from black people rejecting their natural appearance. The weapon found a new delivery mechanism and a new revenue model. The scamming is not just moral collapse. It is what happens when a generation that has absorbed a value system centered on individual acquisition and visible wealth through music, social media, and the absence of any alternative vision of success. And they encounter an economic system that offers them no legitimate path to that wealth. The weapon created both the desire and the blockage, and then stepped back and watched. This is the sophistication of what we're dealing with. It is not random, it is not accident, it is a system that has been running for centuries, updating its delivery mechanism while maintaining its core function, making the Jamaican people the primary instrument of their own limitation. But the system may not have anticipated this. Consciousness. A people who can see the weapon cannot be fully controlled by it. Naming it is the first act of dismantling it. So what is the antidote to the most dangerous weapon ever used on Jamaica? It's not simple, it's not quick. And anyone who tells you it is either has not understood the depth of what was done or is selling you something. But it is possible. And it has already been demonstrated by the Maroons who refused the weapons installation entirely, by the people who kept the ancestral traditions alive underground, by the musicians who turned the weapons damage into art that carried healing, and by every Jamaican who looked at what was done to their people and chose to remember rather than forget. The antidote to the removal of identity is the restoration of identity. Identifying the real history, the real ancestry, the African civilizations that existed before the ship, the knowledge of what was carried across the ocean and kept alive despite everything. The antidote to the removal of values is the restoration of the ancestral communal ethic. The understanding that what harms your neighbor harms you, that your actions are accountable to the community, to the ancestors, and to the generations that will come after you. That success built on the harm of others is not success. It is the weapon running through you. Antidote to the removal of accountability is the rebuilding of the spiritual framework that made accountability feel real and meaningful, not the colonial church's version of accountability, which was primarily about compliance. but the ancestral version, which was about your relationship to the living, the dead, and the unborn simultaneously. The antidote to the removal of community is the deliberate rebuilding of community, not the garrison community that was built to serve a political party. The ancestral community, built around shared identity, shared values, shared accountability, and the shared commitment to the well-being of every member. And the antidote to the weapon's most recent updates, which are the social media algorithm, the global entertainment system, the beauty industry, the antidote to that is consciousness. The ability to look at what is being fed to you and ask, who made this? Who benefits from me receiving it? What does it do to my sense of who I am and what I am worth? And is that the truth about me, or is that the weapon talking? A people who can see the weapon, who understand how it was built, how it operates, and how it updates itself, are people who are already beginning to be free of it. The most dangerous weapon ever used on Jamaica never fired a single shot, never required a single soldier after the initial installation was complete. It never needed to be maintained by anyone external once the people themselves had been programmed to maintain it. It ran on the inside, in the mind, in the family, in the community, in the culture, updating itself each generation, finding new delivery mechanisms, keeping the people focused on each other, on the bleaching, on the scamming, on the political colors, rather than on the system that installed the weapon in the first place. So if you're watching this, maybe you already knew this. Maybe you already felt that what was being called a character flaw was actually something deeper. Something that did not start with the person expressing it. That knowing, that refusal to accept the surface explanation is the beginning of the antidote. Share this with every Jamaican you know who has ever looked at what is happening in their culture and asked, why? Why are we doing this to ourselves? This might be the beginning of the answer. If this resonated, like, share, subscribe. The soul remembers, the land remembers, and the mind, when it finally sees the weapon, remembers too.